There's an old grey stone house sitting in a park surrounded by a relatively new neighbourhood in Cambridge. If there weren't a sign out front announcing it as the Fiddlesticks Community Centre, you might not guess that that's what it holds. It's the kind of house that looks like it belongs to another century. Thick walls, uneven stones, windows that have watched the lands around it change from open fields to housing development. For a long time, it was just there, aging. The kind of building that sits empty waiting for purpose. But instead of disappearing, the house stayed. Now if you walk up to it on a weekday afternoon, you hear it before you see it. Kids' voices echoing down narrow hallways, feet thudding on old floors that weren't built for this kind of energy but somehow hold it anyways. Inside there are art supplies and coats piled by the door, equipment stacked wherever it fits. Even a slushy machine waiting for a youth dance later that night. It's an old house that was never meant to be a community centre, and yet it's alive. Old stone made new, not by perfection, but by people. It's a small example of the social infrastructure in our neighbourhoods that shape how a community lives together. Welcome to Community by Design, exploring social infrastructure in Waterloo Region. I'm Jay Harrison. Over the past 4 episodes, we've explored what social infrastructure is and why it matters. We've visited libraries that serve as community hubs. We've walked through public squares that bring strangers together. We've explored how schools can become havens for students and their families to build social capital. Today, we're going to consider the neighborhood scale, the place where social infrastructure becomes most tangible, most personal, and perhaps most powerful. How can focusing on neighborhoods help us plan social infrastructure for the future? As Waterloo Region grows toward 1 million people, we face some real decisions about what that growth looks like. Do we sprawl outward, repeating the growth patterns of the 20th century? Or do we grow smarter, building complete neighborhoods where people can walk to schools, parks, and community centers? Today's episode takes us to Cambridge, to a community center with an unusual name and an even more unusual story. We'll hear about youth who grew up in its programs and now run them. We'll explore how neighborhood associations strengthen communities, and we'll consider what role neighborhoods might play as our region continues to grow. Welcome to the neighborhood. Let's begin. Fiddlesticks Community Centre sits on a hill set back from Cowan Drive in Cambridge, in a neighborhood that didn't exist 35 years ago. It's housed in a modest old stone building that was once slated for demolition. Inside, you might find an after-school program in full swing, a youth committee meeting, or parents gathering for a coffee while their toddlers play. The neighborhood association that calls this home was started in 1992. But to understand Fiddlesticks, you need to know how close it came to not existing at all.
Well, it actually was going to fold. There were 3 people left, and they were told that they needed to bring people to a meeting, and if they didn't bring people, that the city was going to kind of just let it go. And they each had to bring 4 people. So they ended up with 12 board members at that meeting.
That was 1997. Kim Fowler, who joined the board as a volunteer at that fateful meeting, is now the full-time executive director of Fiddlesticks Community Centre. But the organization's story begins even earlier.
This was a relatively new neighborhood. First housing kind of went up here around 92, 93. And after about 10 families called into the city, and they're like, there is nothing to do. There were maybe 7 streets in this neighborhood at the time. And the city just kind of kept collecting names. And once they had, I think they had 10, they called them back and said, hey, would you like to have a meeting? And we will talk about how we can get some stuff happening in your neighborhood. So city sent a staff person out. They had a little meeting, and the Clemens Mill Village Neighborhood Association Committee was started. And the city basically said, what's your priority? Well, our kids. Well, how about we help you run summer camp so that you can have some kids that go in the morning to summer camp at one age group, kids that go in the afternoon at another age group, and you guys can run it. We'll hire and supervise the staff. So that's basically how it started. And their first camp ran in 1992. And it was a group of moms who booked the buses. They did the registration with support from the city. And They supervised the staff. They made sure that all the stuff that they needed to buy and all the craft supplies were ready. And they ran a summer camp for 30 kids in the morning and 30 kids in the afternoon for 6 weeks. And it was a resounding success.
The birth of this neighborhood association Kim is describing is based on what she calls a community development model. Instead of the city saying, here's what we're going to provide for you, they wait for residents to identify what they need and then support them in making it happen. In turn, she says, they use that model in how they operate.
So the city dollars that we receive are supposed to be used for the community development model. So some organizations have grown and evolved, and like one of our community center neighborhood associations has a medical wing now. Another one of the neighborhoods has really started to focus on newcomers. But the majority of us are very kind of place-based and develop based on what our neighbors want to see happening.
From that first summer camp, Fiddlesticks evolved organically. Volunteers started an aerobics program, then a volleyball program. They ran everything out of people's basements and eventually a small building in the neighborhood, until they outgrew those spaces. In the year 2000, they held a competition in the neighborhood for best yard decor to get people to connect with the association. The announcement of the winner was held at their small building in the neighborhood, and it was packed.
And at the time, Mayor Jane Brewer loved to go to everything. So she showed up and she walked in and she's like, I think this is a fire code violation. You have so many people. And I'm so sorry. We've got the doors open. You know, it's nice outside. We're trying to get them out. That day, we actually got a phone call and she said, you know, there's this building up on Cowan. And we actually were running a Parents and Tots program out of this building, but the Optimist Club were using it at the time, but it was being underutilized. But apparently this building had been saved from demolition because they figured one day a neighborhood association would grow to the point where it could use the space. So when she saw that and she knew that, she was like, I think it's time.
In February 2001, Fiddlesticks moved into the building they occupy today, the old stone house up on the hill. They've been there ever since, tucked into the middle of the Clemens Mill neighborhood. So where does the name Fiddlesticks come from?
That is actually kind of funny. Back in the day, there was a golf course. It was called the Saginaw Golf Course. The neighborhood association was in place before because there were only 7 streets, but they knew that there was a golf course going in. So they did some research, and the golf course was going to be called the Fiddlesticks Golf Course. So they're like, hey, we can get ahead of this and have kind of a natural connection if we rename the organization the Fiddlesticks Neighborhood Association. Then when the golf course opens, we'll have a partnership. We'll be able to blah, 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 blah. Well, didn't somebody else buy the golf course before it opened and renamed it? But they were just like, it's a cute name. Like, we'll keep it. So they kept it.
The physical space of the community center is easy to identify as social infrastructure. The programming and connection it enables is clear.
I look at what we do very much as social infrastructure. We've just always called it community development. What we as an organization do is build relationships, and through those relationships, there are connections that are made. And those connections can be, for work. They can be for leadership opportunities. They can be for childcare. They can be for, people who are experiencing socioeconomic difficulties and, making sure that supports are in place. So I think that everything that community centers in Cambridge do would be considered social infrastructure, definitely. A lot of times when people think of neighborhood associations, they think of recreation programming, right? In fact, what our purpose is actually relationship building. And how we do that is through recreation programming.
The programs aren't the goal. Connection is. And those connections can have profound impacts on people's lives. Elena is a good example.
It's her 3rd year being our coordinator of summer programs for our camps. She has relationships with so many children in this neighborhood and so many adults, because every child has a mom's, dad's, big person that picks them up. So the number of people that you get to know when you're in a role like she is in is absolutely incredible. And again, the safety component of that, knowing that, that person is allowed to pick this person up. But the interesting thing is that she's been with us since she was 3 months old. So she came to Parents and Tots with her mom in this room, and I met her. She was sitting in her chair right there. And as I walked past her, I said to her mother, "You are in big trouble," because she's 3 months old and following me like this. The relationship that we have is important because she has gone through and has been involved with this organization in absolutely every possible imaginable way and has built relationships because of her involvement here with half of the neighborhood. I mean, I don't think she can go anywhere where someone isn't saying, "Hey, Skittles," when she comes back from school on breaks, the same thing, running into people at the mall and getting bowled over by a 5-year-old. And it is all about the relationships. So having a space like this, we are very fortunate to have the space that we have because people do naturally come here. And that's the physical part of the social infrastructure.
Elena's story illustrates something important about neighborhood-scale social infrastructure. It creates pathways for people to grow within their community, from infant to participant, to volunteer to leader. It's about building relationships that span generations and create safety nets of mutual recognition and care. Youth, it turns out, are an important part of the neighborhood scale. Our reporter Karen spoke with Chanelle Martin, who's the volunteer and community engagement coordinator at Fiddlesticks, about her experience with the center that started in childhood.
Why is Fiddlesticks important to you?
So I started volunteering here when I was 12. My mom thought it would be a good idea for me to make some friends in the neighborhood. So I put in an application, and I was a leader in training, as it was called at the time, for the summer. And I just kept coming back and back because I kept making new friends here, lifelong friends who to this day, over 20 years later, I'm still seeing on a regular basis. It's just been a really nice community. People here are really friendly. It's diverse. I feel like our ideas are heard both as a youth, now as a staff, but then also our adult volunteers. I just love the area so much that I now have a son who also comes to our programming. So it's really, really special.
Do you have a favorite memory of coming here as a youth?
Oh my gosh. So I'm not a camper whatsoever. And Kim had encouraged us to do a sleepaway camp here on site. So it was my first time sleeping in a tent. And so that was really cool for me. Still not much of a camper, but it's still one of those experiences for me that is unique to Fiddlesticks. Now, I did try it again with Fiddlesticks off-site. Again, the camping was not for me, but the experience with my peers, with Kim and other staff, was amazing as a youth. And even now, I encourage all of our youth volunteers and youth participants, if they get a chance, to do that sleepover camp each summer. It's an awesome experience.
Chanelle's experience points to something Kim emphasized repeatedly. Youth are central to everything Fiddlesticks does. A neighborhood is a community at the scale of children and young people. It's often where their schools, friends, and play spaces are. A community center like Fiddlesticks that uses a youth-centered community development approach can be a net upstream that catches kids before they can fall too far. An effective neighborhood approach, Kim believes, needs to include youth.
I guess I can't stress enough how important it is to engage youth in the process. So if you're looking at physical infrastructure as part of all of this, let the kids in on it. Like, honestly, if you can give them space where they feel comfortable, where they feel like they've been included in the design, they're going to spend time there, and they're going to teach their friends to respect it. And in teaching their friends to respect the space, they teach their friends to respect each other, and they teach their friends to respect other people. Just get the kids involved and really listen to them, because they're so brilliant. They really are. And they just don't get enough credit.
The youth at Fiddlesticks are not just program participants. They are volunteers, staff, and leaders. They are the lifeblood of the neighborhood. For some, the center creates a space where young people can thrive before crisis hits, and where they can see themselves as part of something bigger.
There's a young person. He was about, 10 years old, maybe. He was in our scouting group. And his mom even wrote this in a newspaper article that she sent in a number of years ago, that this kid could have gone one way or the other. So she was trying really hard to get him involved with some positive stuff. So she brought him to a committee meeting to work on the Strawberry Social when he was about 12. And so he kind of was hanging out and helping us figure out what would the young people want to do at a Strawberry Social. So he helped do all the crafts and all that kind of stuff. Well, fast forward 2 years and he's old enough to be a supply staff at our summer camp. So we hire him as a supply staff. You know, they have to do their first aid. They have to do high five training, all this stuff. So he's 14 and he's a kook. He's still a kook. He's like in his late 20s now. So summer camp's there. He does a fantastic job, a really great young person. And then fast forward to Halloween. And I'm at home and it's like 8:45 at night. My phone rings and I'm like, hello. He's like, Kim, it's Mitchell. I'm like, what's up, Mitchell? Like, why are you, like, it's Halloween. Aren't you out? And he goes, no, I was giving out candy. Do you know how many kids I know in this neighborhood? I'm like, well, we had 256 different kids at camp this summer. So chances are at least 256. And he's like, every time I opened the door, they were like, Snuffles, I didn't know you lived here. I said, oh, great. Now they all know where you live, right? He says, like, I thought about that. He says, but I couldn't tell half of them because they were dressed up in their costumes. So I'm trying to figure out who they are. I said, isn't that neat, though, that you know that many kids? He says, it's just really weird. I said, well, I want you to think about something. How important is it that you know 256 kids in this neighborhood? And I can just picture him because he's 14 and he's a guy, right? I don't know. I can see him on the other end, just, lifting his shoulders. I don't know. I said, well, Mitchell, think about this. If you were walking down Saginaw Parkway heading to Timmy's and you saw Vivian running down Saginaw Parkway on the other side and she's upset and there's a man walking behind her, what would you do? And he says, well, I don't know. Is it her dad? I said, I don't know. Is it? And he went dead silent. And he says, I would know if it was her dad. I'm like, right. So if it was her dad, what would you do? Well, she's a bit of a pill, so she probably is just misbehaving, is what he said. I started to laugh. And I said, what if it wasn't her dad? He says, well, I'd go and help her. I said, exactly. So the fact that you live in this neighborhood and that you are engaged with your community center and that you are a staff here really has a huge impact on safety for children who have been in your care. I said, just like, think about that. And he's like, yeah, that's really important.
Mitchell's story doesn't end there.
Mitchell and his now wife were both camp leaders, but they could only be camp leaders if nobody knew they were dating. That was my rule. So they are now married, have a little boy. They volunteer still, and they're teachers for the Catholic School Board in Waterloo Region. When they got married, they had bought a house, and last year moved back, sold their house and moved back here. And they said they needed to be back at Fiddlesticks.
Kim's story about Mitchell illustrates something fundamental about how neighborhood-scale social infrastructure works. When you create spaces and programs where young people are genuinely valued, where they're given real responsibility, and where they're trusted, they become the next generation of community builders. Kim and the other adults in the community also show the young people in the neighborhood that they are valued members of the community by trusting them with physical space.
For a lot of them, they spent a lot of time here. I mean, we would give a group of 16, 17-year-olds a key and say, you want to go play cards? That's fine. Don't burn the place down, right? One of them was a staff, so they've been fully trained, and we trust them. You train them, you trust them, and you let them lead.
Letting youth know that the space belongs to them as well is another way of telling them they belong.
Tonight, we have a youth dance, so I'll be dropping stuff back off here at 10 o'clock tonight, 10:30. And as I drive up, there will be a bunch of teenagers hanging out under that pavilion. And I back up, we get rid of the stuff, and I walk out, and they think I'm coming to give them trouble, and I'm not. I'm coming to give them chocolate. It's like, hey, guys, throwing chocolate bars, do me a favor, take care of the place, right? Relationship building. We've had one act of vandalism under that pavilion since it went up in 2018. So, that space that people can come, places where kids feel that they're comfortable and that they are respected and able to kind of hang out, can be a very positive thing and teaches them positive things like, hey, they're not kicking us out of here. They're saying that we're okay to be here, and they're actually trusting us to take care of it and maybe and I say to them, tell your friends to take care of it too.
John got caught in the net because his friend Morgan knew that Fiddlesticks was a safe place to turn.
There was one time where I happened to be here by myself, and a young person came and knocked at the door, which, knock here, you just come in. So I thought, oh, he doesn't know us. And I opened the door and I'm like, hey, and I'll use a different name, obviously. I'm like, hey, how are you? He says, hi, I'm John. And my friend Morgan is down at the bottom of the hill and he told me I needed to come up and talk to you. I'm like, oh, okay. What do you want to talk about, sir? Well, my mom died a couple of months ago and I just can't do this anymore. Yeah. So do what, right? So I'm just like, okay. Close sign went on, closed the door, sat down, and we chatted for a good amount of time. He had 2 younger sisters. Parents are separated, or were separated. Now they're living with dad, and obviously sisters are having a really hard time. He's 16 years old, and he's trying to help his sisters get through this, and it was a lot. So after enough time that I felt he wouldn't get up and leave, I said, I've got to call your dad. We need to get your dad here so that we can chat, because you're not in a safe spot right now, and I'm really concerned about you. So he did. He let me call dad. Dad immediately came down. We had a chat. I hooked them up with some resources. There's a place called the Coping Center in Blair, and dad took him home. They got all set up with that, and I was just thrilled to death that Morgan had the presence of mind to bring him here because he didn't know what else to do. So fast forward, I'm upstairs in my office randomly, and somebody was down and they called up. They're like, Kim, there's this guy here. He's got a Texas accent. He says he wants to talk to you. I'm like, okay. I come downstairs and I walk down and I look up and I'm like, John? And he's like 6'2", and he's like, how are you doing? And he's got this thick Texas accent. I'm like, where did you get that? He says, well, I went down to Texas because that's the only place that they do the course that I wanted to do. So he's now a Formula One race car mechanic. I'm like, wow, that is so cool. So we make a coffee, we sit on the front porch. We talk probably for a good 45 minutes, maybe even an hour, just chatting about what it was like down there. I carried a gun. It was just a really fun conversation. And then he just said, well, it was really good to see you. And I said, it was great to see you too. And he bent down, gave me a hug, and off he went. And I haven't seen him since. And we didn't talk about that day, but he just, I think, wanted to come here so that we would know he was okay.
These stories about the youth of Fiddlesticks show us that neighborhood-scale social infrastructure creates the conditions for deep, sustained relationships to form. It's about young people having a place where they're known, valued, and trusted, and in a moment of crisis, knowing exactly where to go for help.
There are intentional things that you can do for community development that, we only hire from our volunteer pool. So, we have 35 kids every year who are with us as volunteers, and they'll do that for a couple of years. And then when somebody ages out or, goes and gets their lifelong job and isn't a summer camp leader anymore or coordinator, then we bring them up through the ranks. So, last year we had over 200 years of experience with us and 19 staff because they've been with us for so long. Youth are not our leaders of tomorrow. They are our leaders today, and they don't get enough credit. They get a bad rep. They're wonderful people, and they want to do great things, and we need to trust them, and we need to give them actual responsibility. So when they come in here and we say that, hey, we would love you to run a youth dance, I don't run behind them saying, oh, don't do it that way, don't do it that way. I run behind saying, did you think about the risk, right? As we do risk management, as long as all the risk is covered, whatever you guys, however you want to see it, that's how it's going to happen. And they're engaged then because they know that their ideas are valued, and they stick around, and then they pull their parents in.
Centering neighborhoods in our conversation about how our region plans for growth provides an opportunity to leverage the leadership of youth. Waterloo Region is growing. We're on a trajectory toward 1 million people over the coming decades. That growth presents us with choices about where we build, how we build, and what kind of community we want to be. Sam Nabi has been thinking a lot about these questions. As project coordinator for 1 Million Neighbours Waterloo Region, he's been facilitating conversations with nonprofits and community groups across the region. What he's learned has a lot to do with neighborhoods.
We have some real decisions to make, and a lot of my advocacy started with Hold the Line Waterloo Region, where we're talking about protecting the countryside line. And there's still a lot of goodwill for that in local decision makers. But the provincial government has made it harder and harder for us to enforce that. Our countryside line is getting chipped away a little bit. If we keep sprawling outwards, like the traditional growth model of the 20th century, then we're going to ruin our groundwater. We're going to ruin our farmland, and we're going to make traffic worse. We're going to make, commute times longer. Some of these new subdivisions that are being built at the edge of Kitchener, for example, people moved in and they haven't had streetlights or sidewalks for years because the infrastructure planning didn't catch up. And so as that growth intensifies, it's smarter and more reasonable to grow within neighborhoods that have infrastructure and that have resources. And so we're trying to have this conversation about smart growth in a new way, because just doing it based off of urban planning discussions I don't think has been successful. So telling the story of smart growth in a way that resonates with frontline nonprofit work is how we're going forward with this project. You want to have your kids be able to walk to school. You want to have libraries and parks close by. And to do that, it's better to welcome new neighbors into the neighborhoods that already exist.
But welcoming new neighbors isn't always easy. There's resistance to change, resistance to density, and resistance to the idea of more people moving into established neighborhoods.
But if we frame it in a discussion about resources, then there's two sides to that coin. If your neighborhood is growing and you're welcoming new neighbors, then you should also see new investment in public infrastructure. You should see that new swimming pool or more programming at the community center. And so we also need to hold government to account to provide those things for the growing population. Looking towards the next couple decades and this region reaching 1 million people, we're starting to hear press releases and vision statements from the regional government or from the Chamber of Commerce. And they have particular priorities that they're emphasizing. We have big projects that we can see ourselves ramping up for as a community, like Phase 2 Ion or GO Train to Toronto or the new hospital. And those things are going to require everyone to be a part of the solution. But there's a lot of other things that I think fell under the surface that needed to be brought forward. And that was coming from the lived experience of nonprofit groups who are doing frontline service delivery and helping their neighbors really every day in very tangible ways that don't often get appreciated. So that those were the voices I wanted to make sure were foregrounded.
1 Million Neighbours is a project that came out of a desire to reshape the story of smart growth. It has involved about 100 people and 65 nonprofit and community organizations. Bringing people from diverse sectors into discussion, 1 Million Neighbours used a framework called multi-solving to guide the discussions.
Essentially, that's about finding a single investment that has multiple benefits and that enhances equity. So if we're talking about something like after-school childcare, okay, that's going to help provide some socialization and skill building for youth, but also that's providing assistance for parents who maybe wouldn't be able to work that job if they didn't have childcare, right? And increasing people's access to the workforce in that way. If we talk about a park, we talk about the programming that's in that park. Maybe we can find ways to use a resource like that so that it meets multi-generational needs. Is there something for grandparents to do while their grandchildren are playing that is not just them watching the kids, but also providing some social connection for that generation as well? I think as our problems and our challenges get more complex, we realize that things like housing is not just one issue. Things like addiction is not just one issue, and we need to tackle them in different ways for different people.
Out of the multi-solving process, the group produced a document that sets out a vision of an ideal future when we've reached 1 million people and the priorities to get there. Before they could get to that vision document, though, they had to make sense of the information they were gathering. And a workshop in Cambridge helped them see how a hyperlocal lens would help translate what they were hearing into a vision they could share.
Where this really started to coalesce in terms of how do we take this knowledge and move it forward was during a roundtable in Cambridge, where, first of all, me and the other facilitators from Kitchener got an earful about how Cambridge is really underrepresented and doesn't get the credit it deserves and doesn't get the support it deserves. They are constantly struggling against this idea that there are organizations with Waterloo Region in their name that don't serve all of Waterloo Region. And so the participants in that workshop wanted to emphasize that it's not just about does something exist in the region, but how accessible is it, and is it accessible in all neighborhoods? And we really have to drill down to that neighborhood level to understand who has resources, who has access to resources. And we really took that idea and ran with it. So in the report, a lot of our measurable outcomes talk about measuring things by neighborhood, because it's not just about does the region have a rapid transit system, but how many people can actually walk to a stop where they have frequent and reliable transit. It's not just about how many jobs there are, period, but how many jobs can people walk to or cycle to or take transit to without getting stuck in traffic. And it's not just about having good schools, but where those schools are, and can kids walk to school themselves? Do they have that independence? Is there a safe route? And so all of those come back down to the neighborhood scale. And when I asked people about this ideal future, even though these were organizations that serve the whole region, a lot of the discussion did come back down to the neighborhood scale as well. It's about having all of those resources and relationships close by, and affordability plays into that in a huge way as well, because if you can't afford to live in the neighborhood that's gentrifying, or that's getting all these great resources, but then people are getting priced out, then you're back to square one.
The neighborhood scale is important for another reason. As communities grow larger, the need for local identity within that broader metropolis becomes more important, whether through formal neighborhood associations or not.
If you look at New York, they have their 5 boroughs and people identify with those. If you go to Montreal, they also have boroughs that have a lot of decision-making and budgeting power, actually. If you go to Toronto, we know about Toronto as a city of neighborhoods. And so I'm not saying that Waterloo Region will become, a Toronto, but we already have this culture of identifying with Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, the townships, our particular neighborhoods. And so leaning into that identity and that infrastructure that's already there, I think is a good way to address some of the challenges that are before us.
Kim from Fiddlesticks echoes Sam's reflection on the need for neighborhood level identity as we grow.
I feel that having neighborhood associations that are place-based, that have those boundaries, will be even more important. Because if you talk to kids at the high school and you say to them, hey, what neighborhood do you live in? Most of them are going to know, I live in the Fiddlesticks neighborhood. I live in the Greenway neighborhood. I live in Hesper Village neighborhood. And they have it's kind of an identifier for them, right? So the larger we get as a region, the more we need to have those kind of micro villages, right? If you have enough of those, and this happens in Cambridge, if you have enough of those, then you can start kind of playing against quote unquote each other. So, hey, we're going to have a basketball tournament, and I know a couple of the neighborhoods will do that. It'll be, Preston Heights versus Silver Heights. So you have those. It's like a small town feel, or a smaller village within the larger municipality or region. So I think that this model of community development will become more and more important as the region grows.
Micro villages within a larger region, places where people know each other, where teenagers can identify where they're from, where there's healthy competition and collaboration between neighborhoods. It's a vision of growth that doesn't sacrifice the intimate scale of community connection.
I think whenever you bring people together, particularly when you're bringing them together in kind of smaller groups, you tend to build, again, it's relationship building. If you have a group of 20 people versus a group of 200 people that are participating in something, those 20 people get to know each other a little better. And then those 20 people end up in different programs or different events, and then they start talking. Like it's the web. I call it the web. The web here is kind of cool, and people seeing each other at the park now and saying, oh, "I remember you from the Jingle and Mingle event that we were at," or they come in, they walk in, they're like, "Oh, you're going to sit on the committee for summer camp this year?" Yeah. Oh well, we met when we were doing this. So it's just. The connections are incredible.
The web of connection is what neighborhood-scale social infrastructure makes possible. Sam and his team at 1 Million Neighbours want to help neighborhoods build the infrastructure they need.
The next step is to develop a neighborhood equity map that we've started. There's a proof of concept created through partnership with Civic Tech Waterloo Region, and we have this map that shows on a neighborhood basis access to resources like swimming pools, trails, parks, and community centers. And then we normalize that by population. So you can go click into each neighborhood and they're color coded based on this neighborhood has lots of access based on their population. And this neighborhood maybe doesn't have lots of access and they would benefit from a new community center or a new park. And once we have that data, that becomes an effective advocacy tool that neighbors in those neighborhoods can take to City Hall or take to their elected officials and say, look, this map says we don't have as many playgrounds as other neighborhoods in this region. What can we do about that? So we really want to help support neighborhoods with advocating for specific interventions that are going to be beneficial to them. So having more resources and more independence at the neighborhood level, I think is the way to go because they know what they need. And granting bodies should really trust local communities that they do know what they need.
Trust local communities. They know what they need. It's the same principle Kim talked about with the youth at Fiddlesticks. Train them, trust them, let them lead. It's the same principle behind the community development model. Wait for people to tell you what they need, then help them make it happen. It's a different way of thinking about planning for growth, not top-down, but bottom-up, creating conditions for communities to solve their own problems. The sense of identity that neighbors in Clemens Mills have built is so strong that not even Google could deny it.
The volunteers, and they're all community members, they have brought this organization from, as we used to say, boxes in basements and 3 programs to, having this site, having another site, running programs and events, and being so well known that Google renamed the neighborhood. One day I went on Google, I was like, what that just happened? Now, if you look up Fiddlesticks on Google Map, it actually pulls up and has named us Fiddlesticks. This area is now called Fiddlesticks. So good on all of the community for getting it out there, searching for themselves so often that Google has renamed it. When people move to the neighborhood now, they're like, oh yeah, I moved to the Fiddlesticks neighborhood instead of I've moved to Clemens Mill.
We began this episode outside an old stone house on a hill, a place that nearly disappeared before anyone realized what it could become. Today, that house stands because of relationships, shared care, and people choosing to show up for one another. Fiddlesticks reminds us that social infrastructure isn't always planned from the top down. Often it grows quietly, over time, with people like Kim, Chanelle, and Sam, who see the possibilities in change and commit to taking care of what matters to their community. As our region continues to change, the Stone House offers a simple lesson. When we invest in places where connection can take root, we're building belonging. Over these 5 episodes, we've explored social infrastructure from many angles. We've visited libraries and public squares. We've explored how schools can be a safe haven for students and families from marginalized communities. We've considered the role of local media in keeping communities connected. Today, we've focused on the neighborhood scale, the level where social infrastructure becomes most tangible and most powerful. What we've heard from Kim at Fiddlesticks and Sam with 1 Million Neighbours is that people are already building and using social infrastructure, whether they call it that or not. The language might differ, but the core principle is the same. Creating conditions for people to connect across difference, to know and be known, and to care for each other. There's value in bringing these diverse efforts together under a common framework. That's what the Waterloo Region Community Foundation has been doing through their current strategic focus on social infrastructure. Through events, grant-making, thought leadership, and sponsoring projects like this one, the Foundation is leading the community in a conversation about the importance of social infrastructure. As Waterloo Region grows toward 1 million people, we have choices to make about where we build, about how we invest in public infrastructure, about whether we prioritize the neighborhood scale. What Kim, Sam, Chanelle, and countless volunteers across our region show us is that neighborhood-scale social infrastructure works. It creates safety. It builds belonging. It gives teenagers a place where they're trusted and valued. It provides a landing place in moments of crisis. That's the power of neighborhood-scale social infrastructure. That's what it looks like when we plan for growth in a way that centers community, relationship, and human connection. Thanks for joining us on Community by Design. Thanks to our guests on today's show, Kim Fowler, Chanelle Martin, and Sam Nabi. You can find links to resources mentioned in today's show in the show notes, including information about Fiddlesticks Community Center, 1 Million Neighbours, and the Waterloo Region Community Foundation's work on social infrastructure. This has been the final episode of our 5-part series. We hope these stories have inspired you to think differently about the social infrastructure in your own community, and perhaps to get involved in shaping it. You can enjoy all episodes of this show by visiting midtownradio.ca or downloading the Midtown Radio app. Community by Design is produced by me, Jay Harrison. The writing team is myself and Karen Atkins, and the editing team is Darren Atkins, Srijit Ramaswamy, and me. The music in today's show was from Rocket Jr., Par Hagstrom, and Loyer, courtesy of Epidemic Sound. Our executive producer is David Harms. This show was made possible by the support of the Waterloo Region Community Foundation and listeners like you. Visit midtownradio.ca to hear more local programming and find out how you can contribute to uplifting local musicians and community voices.